My name's Jeff Gould. I'm an alcoholic. And this morning, questionably a poor representative of Alcoholics Anonymous, Mo, called me in 50. She's like, it'll be good to see you in 15 minutes. I was like, oh, okay. I'll be on the tollway. And so anyway, my mom's going through Alzheimer's, right? The neat thing about memory loss is everything's a surprise. You know what I mean? Oh, okay, I'm speaking in 15 minutes. Cool. Anyway, thank you for asking me. It's good to be here, Chris. That was a warm introduction. I think I'll start with something I'll share with you that I've just been thinking about this past week. It was a conversation I was having on Facebook. Somebody kind of posted a meme on the idea of self-love, right? And I was like, let me back up. My name's Jeff Gould. I'm an alcoholic. My home group is Smoking Gun Big Book Step Study of Dallas, Texas. We meet Sunday nights. That would be tonight at 6:30. I have a sponsor. His name is Mike Maynard. He's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I have a home conference. That conference is Fellowship of the Spirit. We meet in Estes Park the last weekend in July in Colorado. And I have a sobriety date, and that sobriety date's November 22nd of 2002. And it's good to be here. So I was reflecting on this idea of self-love, and it's kind of funny. I mean, I don't think the opposite of black is always white, right? Like you talk about low self-esteem, and you think, well, what I need is some high self-esteem, right? Something like that. And when I think about the term self-love, especially in the way I think those two terms don't go together in the same sentence, not in the way the book describes it, right? So I think for me, the opposite of low self-esteem is a lack of self-regard altogether. It's just not to be, and as a result of that lack of self altogether, I get to experience love and the sensation of love. And I think that's how this program has worked for me. So starting off, going back, I'm an alcoholic, and that was the source of a lot of trouble for me. I'll touch on some of the basics of that. I'll say this, 4 wires needed to cross for me to make a beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous. We make it sound very academic. Hey, get a sponsor, 90 and 90, do the steps. Which, by the way, those are good suggestions, but that's predicated on the idea that the universe has been kind and soft on you and open. Because I got to tell you, 4 wires needed to cross for me to even make a beginning here. I had to be desperate. Without desperation, you better believe this is not only is this plan B for me, this is more like plan M. Like I got about 6 other things that are going to get in the way of me doing this, get an apartment here, move there. So I had to be desperate, and boy, you better believe I had to be willing. Now, I've been desperate and willing before. One time I pretty much got mauled in the park in Tucson, Arizona, and I was lying there bleeding in the grass, and man, had anybody stretched out their hand that day and said, let me introduce you to a new way of life, my friend, I know I would have taken it. I was as desperate as the dying can be. But there was nobody there on that day, right? Because I'm a guy with some social problems, i.e. homelessness is what I'm talking about. I had to have a situation that loaned itself to making a beginning, right? I've seen a couple guys that were the opposite. At the clubhouse where I got sober, Little House, I actually saw a guy with a shopping cart full of cans in his sleeping bag. I saw him get sober, sleeping in a desert. Not my story. I needed a situation that loaned itself to making a beginning. And this might be the most importantly. And when those 3 wires crossed, which for me is going to be a real limited amount of time. that desperation and willingness holds, there better be someone in my face talking good sense about it, what it means to be in this program, or my thinking is going to change again real fast. So for all my desperation and suffering, and I mean real suffering, from alcoholism, those 4 wires crossed exactly one time. It was almost, you could say it was an act of divine providence. On November 21st, 2002, I was desperate, I was willing. A door in the universe had opened and put me in the bed of a free state-sponsored social program. And right at that moment, there was somebody in my face that was carrying a message of depth and weight. And the door had opened and I was given my shot. And I took it. And it's 19 years later. You know, when we talk about this allergy of the body, right? This might save somebody's life. Why don't we read this? There's an interesting line in here. We believe and it was suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol in these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. The phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Sometimes I think we try and overqualify ourselves, and in our zealousness to actualize our alcoholism, we make it sound like, you know, every time we took a drink, 15 different buildings burned down and we wrecked 18 cars, right? But you got to remember, there's somebody sitting in the crowd where that wasn't their experience, and they're in the middle of weighing it out, like, what is wrong with me? Because I got to tell you, I worked at Cafe Magritte in downtown Tucson for 5 years. The only benefit, the benefit of that job was you got 2 free shift pints in those nice pint glasses. They had Guinness Bock, they had some sort of hard apple cider, and they had amber something, right? So I would get my 2 free shift pints and go home and light something out of the ashtray, watch a little TV, go to bed. To be fair, looking back in retrospect, I probably drank my 2 free shift pints. I'm certain now, looking back with honesty, I opened my wallet and there was $1 and 2 dimes and a nickel and 6 pennies. And there was not enough money for a third drink. But memory is hazy, right? So here I am in the middle of alcoholism thinking I've drank normally thousands of times. But here's what the book says. Never occurs. Never meaning never occurs. But the lid on the jar of the phenomenon of craving has never just unopened in my mom's lap and she found herself drinking and driving after like 19. That doesn't, what happens to us doesn't happen to normal people. So here, let me rephrase that again. It says it never happens in the average temperate drinker. Doesn't say it always happens in the allergic drinker. There's a lot of us that have mixed histories with this kind of stuff, right? And so there might be someone sitting here like asking themselves, what am I? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, I can think of this and this and this and this that went horribly wrong, but I could think of just as many, maybe more examples where nothing happened. According to the book, if we're letting this give us a diagnosis, yeah, you got a problem. Phenomenon of craving for me, the effect, right, is one of almost just right. So vodka and pineapple, that would be something I like, vodka and cranberry. Bartender, and then it's like, ooh, it's almost just right, right? Bartender. I think normal people have 1 drink, feel funny, 2 drinks, feel giddy, 3 drinks, feel dizzy, 4 drinks, I'm out. I don't feel good. I have 1 drink, I feel thirsty, 2 drinks, I feel almost just right, 3 drinks, I feel almost just right, but a little thirsty. And the thing is the more I drink, the more almost just right I feel. So if I have 2 drinks and man, I'm almost just right. I got a phenomenon of craving. Now at 9 drinks, I'm really, really almost just right. Because the feeling of drinking is the feeling of almost just right. That's all it does. It's called a phenomenon of craving, right? And that's really, you would think that's where my problems start, but believe it or not, in the cycle, that's where my problems end. That's just the end of the cycle. I do a lot of family work with parents, and they're like, but you don't understand. By the way, is this AA, CA, what? AA, okay. I know my friend is a CA member in good standing, and I haven't been here before. I'll tell you, on page 52, it says we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. This is sort of the bedrock and the soil under which that obsessive thought just keeps sprouting up into the sun of alcoholism over and over. Like, deep in my lizard brain, somewhere back deep in there, I know what relief feels like. And when this becomes more intolerable than the memory of that, and we know that the memory of that fades pretty quick, our book tells us it does. When this reality becomes more intolerable than the memory I can barely remember of that, and how intolerant, when the scales tip, I'll do it every time. So this is interesting. I've revisited these principles. Sometimes if you haven't had a drink in a while, like 19 years as an example, sometimes it's good to start your first step here. Am I having trouble with personal relationships? Which ones and in what quantity? Who am I in quarrel with? Who am I in resentment with? Is it possible that I can't control my emotional nature? Describe it. You guys, I had an alarming, I was on Alpha in Preston. I had 100 miles to drive. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I had 100 miles to drive in a 2-hour time period to get home. I had 3 miles left with 15 minutes to meet the mobile vet at the house because one of the animals was sick. And this woman kind of boxed me out in traffic. Well, I'll just say, here's the short story. She boxed me out in traffic twice. And the first time I go like that. And the second time she looked at it, she did that to me. At the next stoplight, I got out of the car and I took my Fellowship of the Spirit coffee mug and I tried to shatter her windshield. And the woman to my right rolled down her window and she said, "You're out of control and I've just called the police." She was right. She was right to do that. I love what Fred says in his More About Alcoholism story. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I got home and I was like, what have I done? Like, what just happened? I wish I could tell you that was old behavior. No, nobody's ever called the police on me before in sobriety. It just hasn't happened. And I was like, anyway, this year's been an interesting year for a lot of introspection. Again, we'll get back to that. So here's an interesting one. We're a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. And this is what I was really gearing towards. I started meditating on that about 10 years ago. I was doing this kind of step one thing. What did Bill mean when he said we couldn't make a living? Was all he was saying was we couldn't maintain employment? Because I think he would have wrote that if he said that. And then I started thinking maybe another word for living is life. Couldn't make a life. Going all the way back into my 20s, that was a problem for me. Anybody ever unfortunate enough? I went to a private Catholic school, and by my mid-20s, I'm seeing people I knew from childhood. Tucson was about as big as Fort Worth, which is where most of this story takes place, in case you felt the need to picture it, by the way. But I would see some of these people that I knew from grade school in the grocery store, and they're like, "Hey, Jeff Gould, good to see you. What's going on?" And it's like, what's going on with you? Oh, we just bought a Daewoo minivan and we're doing hot yoga as a family. We're taking the kids to Disney and this one bought a pony named Sparkles and we're doing the bake sale for, which I sound cynical, but that's kind of what normal people do, right? And they would ask me, well, what's going on with you? And here's the truth, you guys. If I'm even employed, they've already had the conversation with me. If you're going to show up late again, don't show up. We'll mail you your last check. Just consider that your last day. If I even have a girlfriend, the police have been called twice and they've come over and been like, what's going on with you two again tonight? What's the problem here, right? If I even have a car, it's uninsured, underinsured, or on a donut. If I even have a home, it's got one of 3 pink slips sitting on the table. If I'm even in school, you better believe I've already received an email from the dean like, so do you want it, like if you get a medical withdrawal, I'm not sure what's wrong with you, but something's wrong. And here's the thing, and it felt like everything was shaking apart. And here's the kicker about all that. That's when I'm actually trying. That's when I'm trying my hardest and I'm summoning all my courage and all my willpower to pull together this thing called life that looks a little bit like your life, except the difference is I'm wearing it and it just feels like the whole thing is shaking apart because you should see what it looks like when I'm not. That's when I'm trying, right? So I have, one of the current conversations I've been having lately with this guy who's been something like he's been more of a step guide. You know what? I read some inventory and he stopped and corrected me. I said, I have this resentment, or I said, my resentment. He's like, no, let me stop you right there. It's not your resentment. It's the condition of resentment. The condition of resentment is this dark, malevolent force in nature that's formless and it needs me to give it life. To get inside me and get me spooled up and get all my thoughts spun around. And now I'm about to break your windshield with my coffee cup, right? But he's like, but don't say my resentment because it's not you. Quit identifying as it. It is not you. It is it. He also brought this to me in another conversation. I thought that was interesting. Did you ever notice when it says in the 11th step, it says we ask God's forgiveness. It's not saying we ask God for forgiveness, implying God's like, I'm pretty hot with you right now, real disappointed, right? No, that's not what it is at all. Forgiveness is a principle, and we're asking for it in wholesale. Resentment is a principle, right? Resentment's this principle that I'm binded up. And so when I misbehave off that, I'm asking for this entire principle called forgiveness, that it be given to me so I can in turn give it to you, right? That's kind of like some of the dialogue I've been having around this lately in really looking at this destructive, force called resentment, which seems to be the engine that's driving the whole thing. When I first, what is it so I got 20 minutes. How do I want to spend it? When I first wrote inventory, I don't know that I knew what it was I was looking for. When you're as sick as me, trust me, you get sent here, you kind of come across it maybe before you're ready to be here. Do you know, I remember something that was said in I just started talking about this. Do you know something I remember something that was said in my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had crashed a car into a home. My 16th birthday, and one day I had a car 24 hours and was trying to, do some fancy driving and hit a tree, and the tree hit this house and totaled the car. And I just knew, like about a week later, I a real serious problem. And so I lived out on the east side of Tucson where the golf courses were and whatever, but I just wanted to be this downtown kind of hardcore guy. So I took a bus all the way down, because I'm not driving anymore. I took a bus all the way downtown and to the group I would later sober up in, actually, about 15 years later. But there was this, I don't know why this is funny to me, but I remember the meeting was this rough and tumble kind of meeting. And I remember there was a girl in there crying. And I remember having the thought that she might have been like a street person, if you know what I mean. And she was crying, and an older, much more seasoned member of the group told her, she said, "Girl, you are beat up from the feet up, tore up from the floor up, and honey, you need a checkup from the neck up." And I was like, yeah, I remember that. Like, yeah, she probably does need that. So anyway, that's funny to me. So you hear all this different stuff about inventory. And listen, if you're new and you've not been through the inventory process, how about this? Don't bring it up at a noon meeting as a topic, because here's what you're going to get back. Well, I ordered a workbook offline, and my drug and alcohol counselor had me write out my life story. It was 105 pages, and this person was going to say, I wrote mine all in one page, and then this person was going to say 7 deadly sins, 12 and 12 talks about it. And by the end of the meeting, you're going to be like, I don't know what to do. I'm not going to. Confusion is the ally of the ego, right? If I get confused enough, you better believe I won't take any action. Rather than work through it, I'll just stop writing, right? And so, by the way, the instructions are in here. And if you have a good sponsor, maybe, they'll walk you through it and show you what that looks like. And so I say that because here's what I know that I'm looking for now. I think one of in order for me to stay and remain sober, because I suffer this condition called resentment, right? The condition of resentment has found me, has found a host in me. It lives in me. It twists up my thoughts and gives me a screwed up. One of the first things I'm going to need is a new perception. How do I get a new perception? I need to take my perception of life and place it on a shelf and take your feedback on my life and be willing to bring that in as a new perception. Can I live with trying to see my life as you see it, right? We would call this sponsorship, right? And so a good example, this is a little tiny 10-step. When I lived in Tucson, I was well respected in AA, man. Let me say it this way. If I was in the meeting, Jeff Gould, would you like to share? It's pretty common, right? And so I got here, and that wasn't the case. Most of the meetings I was going to is kind of chairman's choice. They'd be like, Ron, how about you? Katie? How about Joe, this guy from whatever his name, from Arizona, the guy sitting right behind him, would you like? And I would be like, I could feel my skin burning, like, oh. And I was so one time I pretended to check my phone, emergency. And I left and I called my sponsor and I said, how the hell am I supposed to get to know anybody in this town if they never even let me share? You know what he said? I think listening to people talk about their lives is a real good way to get to know people. Perception, new awareness. Okay, right? So going into, I remember the page of inventory that kind of cleaved it and set me free. There's this, there's a number of different exercises with this, but there's this exercise called Johari window, which goes something like this. It's like, here's what I know, here's what I know that I know, here's what I know that I don't know, and here's what I don't know that I don't know. Coming into AA, that's this huge box. Coming into AA, I'm almost pure walking, I don't know what I don't know. The problem is I think I know everything, right? And so it takes something like humility to be able to listen, and then and so anyway, I get into this inventory, and I'm going into an inventory armed with my perception of the events of my life, right? The one that changed everything for me, I remember these guys had robbed my house, and I was pretty indignant about that and pretty Just real upset about that, about the way the whole thing went down. It made me feel sick to my stomach. And so I'm reading, I resent my sponsor was good. He was intuitive. He slowed me down. I resent my friends. They robbed my house, effects, yada, 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 this and this and this and this. And he goes, oh. I think he could see the change in my deportment. He said, tell me about your friends. So you met these guys in like the Eagle Scouts or something like that? No, Mike. And I told him what kind of people they were. And he said, oh, so they were like addicts. And then he said, so when you were hanging out with these addict people, were you, out there playing a little sand volleyball or volunteering at the local Boys and Girls Club, something like that? No, Mike, we would break into people's cars. Oh, so they were like burglars, your friends. And then he says, I'm real confused. How did your addict burglar friends, how did they know where you lived, right? Well, we would come over to the house and drink and use. And he's like, wait. So you invited the addict burglars into your home. All your stuff went missing. And what I'm hearing you say is you're real upset about that. And you guys, I think I mean, if you want to call that a spiritual experience, I mean, I guess in the sense that my reality had bent before, but it had never snapped and opened itself up to your reality, where it was like, I love my friend Ralph says, I brought the wolf to the door, and I was like, wait a minute, say that one more time, because I felt that responsibility shift from your fault to my fault, which, by the way, isn't a good feeling, right? This process isn't warm and fuzzy, right? The warm and fuzzy is the part that comes later. Again, like in the absence of self, I get to experience love, right? But it was necessary, and I was like, oh, and it was kind of fascinating to me, like the inner workings of my mind and springs, as Rowland would said. And I was like, wow, that's really weird that I thought that, But that kind of became the key to the inventory that kind of opened up just this whole world of like, what's my, in all this. So, you guys, I had a big experience with Ninth Step Amends. It took 8 years of my life to make my amends, of diligently trying. I had committed I think that tells you everything you need to know. I had committed a great deal of harm. When somebody tells you, Jeff Gould, having anything to do with you at all, worst mistake I ever made. That's humbling. Then for me, I was living on the street like an animal. And my mom would drive up and down the alleys of downtown. And it was like her mom radar. Like, I don't know how she knew how to find me, but she knew how to find me. And she would always bring me a box of Chewy granola bars and $10. And one week, because I was sort of allowed to come there, sort of not. But one week she said, hey, I got to go to a medical convention in Las Vegas, so make sure you don't come by the house this weekend. And she didn't know this, and this may or may not have its place in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I had a duffel bag full of ether and striker plates off matchboxes and cold medication. And what I heard her say was, why don't you come on by the house this weekend? Why don't you take a rock and break the window? Why don't you whip up a bunch of outside issues in my kitchen, and you can sell them and use the money to fix the window? I don't remember what happened that weekend. I really don't. I've tried to recall it before, and it's just something of a lost memory. I do know what she came home to. She drove up from the airport, and hey, why is my window broken? Hey, why is my front door open? Hey, where'd all my animals go? They ran away. Hey, why is my oven red hot, oven coil on? And what's all this riffraff doing in my kitchen? She found my ID on the table. Thank God for Al-Anon. Saved us both. Our next conversation, she said, "You are a monster, and you're not my son. And if dying is something you got to do it somewhere else." She told me the day before I moved here, we were just talking, she said, "I went to Mass that next Sunday, and I got there early, and I prayed for God to kill you because I knew I couldn't help. I knew I couldn't try." So it's a lot of heavy. I'm not normally like this guy right now. There's a lot of heavy stuff going on in my life right now. Like she's, we're looking at, there's just a lot of heavy stuff, and I'm not going to spend my last 10 minutes getting into that. But I brought that up because, we were talking, this was my first year in sobriety, and sometimes my mom's not even digging at me, taking a dig, but sometimes she's just like talking, like going through her own process. And I remember she said, sometimes I wake up at night in a cold sweat, and all I can see is that red hot oven coil. And I guess I picture my life turning to ash and all grandma's blankets and her photo albums and everything I had and just all that burning up. And she's like, it's kind of hard to go back to sleep on those nights. When the content of your life is turned into somebody else's worst nightmare, yeah, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead, right? And so, how do you eat an elephant? Like one bite at a time, right? I just got in here and got busy. My sponsor said, pick 2 easy ones and a hard one, and you have a week. You have a week to do it. And he was pretty good. Like he kind of kept me in line. Every once in a while, I think about 3 times I've needed to be shaken, like shaken. Like it was probably somewhere in our first month. And you guys, my economic value at this point could have been measured in nickels, like really, like on any given day. This is crazy to think about now, like looking back. On any given day, my economic value might have been $6.17. But if I was doing well, I had like $9.25. And like sometimes it's like, whoa, I just came up. I have $16, like homeward bound kind of stuff, right? And I remember I started saving coin jar, all that, saving. There was this little tarot kind of palm psychic like woman up the way from the treatment, like where I was staying. And I was going to go see her because I had this burning question, like, am I even going to get sober or not? Because if I'm not going to get sober, I don't want to build up this structure again. I'll just leave right now. Like if this isn't going to work, like let me know now, And good, bad, right, or wrong. And listen, my sponsor at the time was a Christian man. And I told him about that. And he told me, I don't believe in that stuff. He says, as a matter of fact, if you go see that psychic, you're fired. How's that? We're not working together. But he said something else. He said, but since you're so interested in seeing what your future is, let me take a crack at it. If you do what's in this book, and follow directions, you will get sober. And that turned out to be true for me, So I tell you a little bit about, man, I could go my wife and I were talking this morning. I was recalling a time in my life when I was looking back in some kind of honesty and retrospect. I was extremely out of balance because what I had done, which isn't what AA asked for, but what I had done was I had given my life to Alcoholics Anonymous. I think in some sort of weird addict way, like, oh, this AA thing makes me feel good. I'll do it 24 hours a day as hard as I can. But, I had like 17 sponsees and like 6 service commitments and 3 things. And those things became a strain. They would keep me up at night. I wonder how he's doing. Oh, shoot, I forgot my secretary note, like that. For people that were as sick as I was, though, I think you need to go through that stage for a few years to like really be immersed. I mean, and I think there's got to be not an end point to doing service. That's not what I'm saying. I still have a service commitment. I still sponsor people. I don't do it wildly out of balance as if I'm running from a tidal wave of extreme pain that is going to catch up to me at any second. That being the difference, right? But I think at one time I did do that. Most of my life revolves around sitting at my kitchen table. I would have told you it involved sitting at my kitchen table. Now, with the things, sometimes it's like a Zoom thing, right? And just depending on where people's comfort level is and all that. But most of my AA life is a one-to-one transmission and message. And I have a deep and wonderful and rich spiritual life. And I've been published by AAWS, I think 3 or 4 times, uncredited for 3 of them, in some soft and some hard literature, because it's an anonymous program. But I've had that level of reverence and involvement for this thing called AA. And I think that's important to mention because this is a wonderful way of being, And I've had 2 relationships here, and at the core of both of those relationships has been, let me put it this way, the home back in Tucson and the one like that is very much now. We had an old tree, and every time somebody turned their will and their life over to God, we'd take a knife and put a notch in that tree, And when we knew somebody that had lost somebody, their grandparents, their sister, their brother, we would take those Chinese fire lanterns and write prayers all over them, which is really dubious in the desert. I think there was a couple times, anyway, whatever. It was a beautiful thing to do, probably a little dangerous, whatever. So, but we had board game night and 3rd step night and 11th step night, and we had that and that's one of my values now, that we had that warm set of walls and that warm building that just pulled all this love and all these people together and was a great place to turn your will and your life over to God. And that's something I really value. And going back to that, I picked 2 easy ones and a hard one, and I just worked this out and worked this out and worked this out. So my dad, I had hustled him. Didn't intend to the first time anyway, but I had hustled him for 3 semesters of college money. The first semester I had actually intended to go, and I calculated all my numbers and student IDs this much and registration and books at this much, and he mailed me a check. My parents were divorced. He was out of town. He mailed me a check, and the check showed up on a Friday. And I went and cashed it, and it was about $2,000. Do I need to tell you what happened next or no? You get it. So that was backed by the falsification of grades and anthropology, Spanish 101's been a little different. It was just all a ruse. The next 2 semesters I didn't even intend to go, right? And when he found out, he was so mad. He was like, "You're a liar and you're a thief." My dad was a West Point guy. His dad was a West Point guy. My dad was a nuclear weapons engineer. And so the day I made this amends, which was kind of a couple of powerful things had happened that day. My wife described him as fierce. Your dad is a fierce man, right? And I'm a tattooed guy, and I think for the first few years I had been walking around in my sobriety, and I knew my dad was coming, and something about him was just paralyzing to me. You feel like you have 2 left feet and buck teeth, and you just like it was just almost disabling to me. And Dad's coming to visit, and I would button down my shirt, put the button on extra tight, and hello, Father, ha ha ha, my sobriety is going wonderful at this time in my, and it was just very and I've been sober for a bit, right? And I remember it was in June, and he was coming to visit me in Tucson, and I'm putting on my shirt and I'm buttoning up my shirt, and it's probably 113 already. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I just start sweating, and I look at myself in the mirror and I thought, I want to do this today, and I'm not going to. And so I put on a t-shirt and I went down to Hotel Congress. And he looked at me and he's like, yeah, you regret that? I go, no. And this had kind of been left out of my original amends. And I was like, let me run something by you. I owe you about $4,000, whatever it was. And and he said, no. And I said, no, listen to me. I owe you the money. I'd like to pay you. And he got real teary-eyed and he said, he said, everything I've ever worked on and put my passion into has been to hurt people, a great many people, right? And he said, it seems like everything you do seems to like help people. And that's what you do. That's what your life is about. He says, why don't you take that money and find somebody you can help in similar fashion? And it was, God's timing and the synchronicity of that is so interesting because we had just been talking about our family had adopted a family for Christmas where, you buy them their tree and their lights, and we didn't even do gifts for each other. By the way, if you've never done that, wonderful experience. We bought kids' clothes and toys for her kids. Her name was Nancy, right? And after we wrapped that up, because it wasn't, I guess it would have been, 5 months later or whatever. But I was talking with Nancy the next day, and I said, hey, because she was uneducated and she was a single mom. I said, if you could do or be anything, what would you do? And she says, I think I'd like to be a nurse. And I said, why don't you meet me at Pima Community College on Monday morning? We'll talk about that. And I don't know if she ever followed all the way through. So I'll close with this. The Arizona Daily Star one day printed an editorial, like a front page story. It must have been slow news day because they're doing something about recovery. And the person who had wrote this, I remember the numbers went something like this. Of those that attempt the recovery process from drugs and alcohol, 90% will be a failure. Of the 3% that succeed, about 80% of that 3% will go on to live fringe lifestyles, methadone clinics, food boxes, case managers, things of that like. And I wrote a letter to the editor back, and I said, with all due respect, you don't even know what you're talking about. Because the people that are in recovery, they're not hanging around the food box place talking to people like you to come up with numbers like that. Might have been your airline pilot on your last vacation from LA to London. Might have been your OB/GYN nurse that just had that fire in her eyes when she handed you the baby. Might have been that extra cool guy at the bank that made sure, your subprime or whatever, that got you that second mortgage on your house, where it's like, something about that guy I just actually like. That's the thing about being anonymous, right? Is they're not breaking their anonymity to you. And I'm like, they're actually everywhere. That's my experience. I'm Jeff Gould. Thanks for letting me share. Good to be here, guys.